I want to be clear about something before I tell you this story. I am a reasonable person. I had the conversations, I was patient, I gave every opportunity for things to change on their own. And when none of that worked, I did not argue, I did not issue ultimatums, I did not leave passive-aggressive notes on the fridge. I simply started handling my own food in a way that made my roommate never want to touch it again. By Sunday, he was the one coming to me with solutions. This is that story. My old roommate was not a bad person overall. We got along fine in most ways. But he had one habit that started small and slowly became impossible to ignore. He ate and drank my food. Not occasionally, not by accident, regularly, consistently, without asking. I would buy orange juice, and by the next morning, it would be half gone. I would buy peanut butter and come back to find it visibly used. Pickles, cream cheese, whatever I had bought for myself that week. If it was in that fridge, it was apparently fair game. At first, I let it go, because moving in with someone new involved an adjustment period, and I did not want to start things off on a bad note over a glass of orange juice. But it kept happening, and it kept happening. And what started as something small started to feel like something else entirely, like a basic lack of consideration, like the kind of thing that only continues because the person doing it has decided your comfort is less important than their convenience. So I said something, calmly, directly, no drama, just, "Hey, I have noticed my food keeps disappearing. Can we be more careful about what belongs to who?" He apologized, said he would pay more attention, and for about 3 days he did. Then it went back to exactly the way it was before. I said something again. Same conversation, same apology, same 3 days of improvement, same result. I had this conversation more times than I should have needed to. Each time he was perfectly pleasant about it. Each time nothing actually changed. And I reached a point where I understood that no amount of reasonable conversation was going to solve this, because the problem was not that he did not understand. The problem was that understanding something and actually changing your behavior are two completely different things. And he had no real reason to change. There were no consequences. There was just me asking again. One Friday evening, I opened the fridge and reached for my orange juice, and it was nearly empty. I had bought it 2 days before. I had barely touched it, and I just stood there for a second, looking at it. Not angry exactly, just done. Done having the same conversation, done being patient, done waiting for something to change that was never going to change on its own. And that is when the idea came to me. Not from spite, not from wanting to cause harm, just from the very simple logic of, if he is going to eat my food anyway, I might as well make sure he thinks twice before doing it again. The plan was simple. That weekend he was home, I would fake being sick, and I would make sure that every time I interacted with my food, he was watching. Saturday morning, I came out of my room looking rough. Not dramatically, just tired, a little off. The kind of look that makes someone ask if you are okay. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was not feeling great, probably just a cold, nothing serious. He nodded and went back to whatever he was doing, and I went to the fridge. I took out the orange juice, I looked at it for a moment, and then I drank directly from the container. Not a sip, a proper long drink, right from the edge. Then I put it back in the fridge. I did not look him directly, but I was aware of exactly where he was in the room. A little while later, I went back to the kitchen. I was making a bagel. I opened the cream cheese, and instead of reaching for a knife, I used my finger. Scooped it out, spread it, put the lid back on, returned it to the fridge, went back to my room. Later that afternoon, I went for the peanut butter. Same approach. Jar open, bare finger, job done. Back in the fridge. And when I opened the pickle jar and a little juice ran over the edge, I licked the rim, put the lid back, returned it to the fridge without a word. Here's the thing about this plan. It only works if he sees it. So I wasn't hiding. I wasn't being secretive. I was just going about my business in the kitchen the way someone would if they genuinely believed they were the only person who was ever going to touch their food. Which, as far as I was concerned, is exactly the point I was making. I could feel him noticing. He didn't say anything on Saturday, but I caught the look. That moment where someone sees something and their brain needs a second to decide what to do with it. He decided to do nothing, for now. Day 2. Sunday, I came out looking a little worse. Still sick, still not dramatic about it, just present. Moving around the kitchen, using my food exactly the way I had been the day before. Orange juice, straight from the container, peanut butter, finger in the jar, cream cheese, same thing. I made myself comfortable. I took my time. And I could feel the tension building in him. The kind of tension that builds in a person when they've seen something 2 days in a row and they can't unknow it. When something that was just a habit, grabbing what was in the fridge without thinking, suddenly has a different image attached to it. I went back to my room and I waited. About an hour later, he knocked on my door, came in, sat down, and in the most carefully casual voice he could manage, he asked me, "Do you always handle food like that?" And I looked at him completely sincerely and said, "What do you mean?" He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen, like the juice, the jars, all of it. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm the only one eating my food, so I never really thought about using utensils. Seemed like extra dishes for no reason." He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they're processing something that has just rearranged several things in their head at once. He didn't say anything else in that moment, just nodded and left. That evening he came back, and he had a proposal. He thought it might make sense, just to keep things organized and avoid any confusion, for each of us to have our own designated shelves in the fridge, our own drawer, our own clearly defined space, so there would never be any mix-up about what belonged to who. I told him that sounded like a great idea, completely reasonable, very mature of him to suggest it. We sorted it out that same evening, labels, shelves, a system, clean and simple. And from that day forward, not a single item of my food was touched. Not the orange juice, not the peanut butter, not the pickles, not anything. The thing that I find most interesting about this whole situation is how it ended. He came up with the solution himself. I never had to have the conversation again. I never had to say, "You keep taking my food and it needs to stop." He arrived at the answer completely on his own, motivated entirely by the mental image of what he had watched me do to that orange juice container for 2 days straight. Sometimes people don't change because they're told to. They change because something shifts in their own head, because the cost of not changing suddenly becomes more real to them than the comfort of staying the same. I just helped that shift happen a little faster than it might have on its own. I've been thinking about this story lately in a bigger context than just food in a fridge, because I think most of us have been in a version of the situation, not necessarily with a roommate, but with someone in our life who hears us and just doesn't change. And we keep having the same conversation, patient, reasonable, giving another chance, because we've been taught that being the bigger person means continuing to explain ourselves until the other person finally to listen. But sometimes the most effective thing you can do is stop explaining and start doing something that makes the cost of ignoring you impossible to overlook. Not to hurt anyone, not out of anger, but because your peace, your boundaries, your basic right to keep what's yours are worth protecting, even if you have to get a little creative about it. Not every lesson needs to be taught with words. Sometimes you just need to drink your orange juice in a way they'll never forget.